The richest woman I've ever met spent 4 hours pretending to be asleep in the back of my car just to find out if I would rob her. She had left a watch worth more than my house sitting right out on the seat beside her, in plain view, eyes closed, breathing slow, and even like she was deep under, and she was waiting the whole time to catch me reaching for it. She'd done it to drivers before. It was a little test she ran on the help to see what kind of person was really behind the wheel, and what she found out that night on a storm-soaked highway at 1 in the morning was not at all what she expected. By the time the sun came up, that billionaire would tell me she'd cried for hours over what she'd heard in my car, and that I'd given her back something she'd thought was gone forever. And the strangest part is, I had no idea any of it was happening. I just thought I was driving a sleeping stranger through the rain. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The most important night of my adult life, the night that gave my daughter her father back and gave a lonely woman her son back. And I spent the whole of it believing absolutely nothing was happening. Just another long fare in bad weather. Just a quiet passenger in a wet road and a job to finish. We almost never recognize the nights that change everything while we're inside them. They disguise themselves as ordinary. I thought I was just trying to get a stranger across the state and get home in time to make pancakes. I'm going to tell you the whole story, what she heard from that back seat, and why it broke her open, and what she did the next morning that changed my whole life and my little girl's. But more than that, I'm going to tell you about the thing a poor man can have that a billionaire would trade her entire fortune for, because that's what this is really about. Before I get into it, one quick thing, and then I'll let the story carry you. I drive strangers through the dark for a living, and I learned a long time ago you don't beg a passenger to stay in your car. You just drive well, and the good ones settle in for the ride. So I won't beg, I'll just say, if you want to come along for this one, climb in and stay to the end, and there's a subscribe button down there if the ride's worth it to you. Now, let me tell you how I ended up driving a billionaire through a thunderstorm at midnight. My name is Cal Bishop. I'm 38 years old, and I drive a car for a living. A private car service, the kind that takes people to airports and meetings, except I work the night shift. The overnight runs. The 2 a.m. airport drops, the long late hauls nobody else wants. And I want to tell you right up front why I work nights, because it's the key to this whole story. I work nights so I can be there in the days, because I'm raising my daughter alone. My little girl is named Daisy, and she's 6 years old, and she is the entire reason my heart still beats. Her mother, my wife, passed away 2 years ago, and after I lost her, I made a promise to myself that whatever else happened, Daisy was not going to lose her father to work too, was not going to be raised by a rotating cast of sitters while her dad chased a paycheck. So I figured out the only arrangement that let me actually be her father. I drive at night while she sleeps, and I'm there in the day while she's awake. I take her to school, I'm there at pickup. I make her lunch and we do her reading, and I'm at every single thing. And then a sitter comes and sleeps over while Daisy sleeps, and I go out and drive strangers through the dark until dawn, and I come home as the sun comes up, and I get her breakfast and start the day. I am tired in a way I cannot fully describe to you. I am tired in my bones. But I am there for my daughter, and that is the trade I made, gladly, and I would make it again 1,000 times. Let me tell you what that life actually feels like, because I think there are a lot of us out here and nobody ever describes it. It means you are never fully rested, not once, not ever. It means your body learns to run on a kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix anymore, a tired that lives behind your eyes. It means you do the school run in the morning with your head still half on the highway, and you read the bedtime story in the early evening fighting to keep your own eyes open, and then you kiss her goodnight and hand her to a sitter and go back out into the dark to do it all, again. People sometimes ask me why I don't just get a normal day job and put her in aftercare like everybody else, and the honest answer is that I buried her mother 2 years ago, and I made a promise standing at that graveside that this little girl was not going to feel like she lost both her parents that day. She lost her mom. She was not going to lose her dad to a time clock, too. So I decided the one thing I would never economize on was my presence. Money, sleep, comfort, my own back and knees and peace of mind, all of that I'd spend freely. But not the mornings, not the pickups, not the pancakes, not the nightmares. Those belong to her, and the night shift is the price I pay to keep them, and I pay it without complaint, because a father who isn't there is just a wallet with a name. So that's the man who pulled up to a luxury hotel one stormy night to pick up a last-minute fare. A tired single dad in a clean but unremarkable sedan, working through the night so his little girl could have her father in the daylight. The fare was unusual. There was a huge storm that night, one of those systems that grounds every flight in 3 states. And so a woman who would normally never in a million years be in a car like mine needed an emergency long-haul drive, several hours across state lines, because her private flight was canceled and she had to be somewhere the next morning. Her name was Vivian Ashford, and even I, who pay no attention to such things, knew that name. She was a billionaire. A genuine, household name, business empire billionaire. The kind of wealth that's hard to even imagine. And here she was, by some fluke of the weather, climbing into the back of my modest little car for a long night's drive. There was something almost funny about it, if you stood back far enough. The storm had done what no ordinary circumstance ever could. It had put one of the wealthiest people in the country into the exact same small space as a tired night shift single dad for hours, with nothing between us but a headrest. 2 people whose lives would otherwise never have intersected for a single second, thrown together by a canceled flight and a wall of rain. She had probably not sat that close to a working person, with no buffer, no assistant, no glass between them, in years. I think the powerful forget that the rest of us are even fully real, the way you forget the names of the people who refill your water. We become a category, a function, the help. And the weather that night had quietly erased all of that, and made us just 2 human beings in a car in the dark, which is a thing money usually works very hard to prevent. Neither of us knew yet that the storm had done us both the biggest favor of our lives. She was cold. Not cruel, exactly, but cold in a way that money sometimes makes people. Clipped, guarded, like she was always braced for someone to want something from her. She gave me the address, told me she had calls to make and then intended to sleep, and made it clear she did not wish to chat. That was fine by me. I'm a professional. I pulled out into the storm and pointed us down the highway, and she made a few terse phone calls in that voice powerful people have, and then she went quiet in the back, and I assumed she'd fallen asleep. Now, here's what I did not know, what I would only learn hours later. Vivian Ashford had not fallen asleep. Vivian Ashford was running a test. She told me about it the next morning, and I'll explain it now so you understand what was really happening in that car. She had, it turned out, a deep and bitter mistrust of people. She'd been burned, robbed, used, lied to, surrounded for decades by people who wanted her money, until she'd come to believe that every single person was on the take if you gave them the chance. And so she had developed this habit, this test. When she rode with someone new, someone working class, someone serving her, she would pretend to fall asleep, and she would deliberately leave something valuable out. That night it was an extraordinarily expensive watch, which she'd slipped off and left sitting on the seat beside her, in plain view, and then she would watch through barely open eyes to see what they did. Did they pocket it? Did they go through her things? Did they take the long route to pad the fare, thinking she was asleep and wouldn't notice? It was how she decided what someone was really made of. And almost everyone, she told me, failed. Almost everyone did something. And I want you to understand that she did not tell me this with any pride. She told it to me like a confession, like a sickness she'd been carrying. Because somewhere along the line, all that testing had done something terrible to her. It had proven over and over exactly what she was afraid of, that people are greedy and small and on the take. But of course it had. When you go through life certain that everyone is a thief, and you keep setting little traps to confirm it, you slowly stop seeing the people who are good because you've already decided how the story ends before it starts. She had built a whole philosophy of contempt for the human race out of watch tests in the backs of cars, and it had made her powerful and rich and absolutely bone-deep alone. She trusted no one. She was loved by no one she trusted. And she had come to believe that this was simply the truth about people, rather than a prison she had built herself, one suspicious test at a time. That was the woman lying in my back seat pretending to sleep. Not a villain. A deeply lonely person who had been disappointed so many times she'd made disappointment into a religion. So, there I was, driving through the rain, with a billionaire pretending to sleep in my back seat, and a watch worth more than everything I owned sitting out in the open, being watched by a woman who fully expected me to steal it. And I had absolutely no idea. I just thought I had a sleeping passenger. And about an hour into that drive, somewhere around 1 in the morning, on a dark and rain-lashed stretch of highway, my phone buzzed on the dashboard mount. And I saw who it was. It was home. It was my sitter's number, which at 1 a.m. could only mean one thing. It was Daisy. Now, I have a rule. I do not talk on the phone while I drive, ever, and I especially do not do it with a passenger in the car. So I did what I always do. I found a safe spot, a well-lit pull-off just ahead, and I signaled, and I eased off the highway and put the car in park, away from traffic, before I answered. I figured my passenger was asleep anyway. I kept my voice low. And I took the call, and it was my Daisy, crying. She'd had a nightmare, a bad one, the kind that sends a 6-year-old straight up out of sleep in the dark, terrified, needing her dad. The sitter came on and apologized, said Daisy was inconsolable and kept asking for me, and I said, of course, put her on, it's all right. And for the next few minutes, parked in the rain on the side of a highway, I did the thing I do. I talked my little girl down from her nightmare, and I had no idea that in the back seat, a woman who had been pretending to sleep had quietly opened her eyes and was listening to every word. I told Daisy I was right there. I asked her to tell me about the dream because I've learned that a fear spoken out loud gets smaller, and a fear kept inside gets bigger. I listened to the whole rambling, tearful story of the monster in the dark hallway. And then I reminded her of the things we always say. I told her that her daddy loved her to the moon and back and around again, which is our thing, that's the phrase, to the moon and back and around again. Because once around just isn't far enough for how much I loved that kid. I told her I'd be home before she woke up, that I'd be the one making her pancakes, that I would never not come home to her. And then, because it's the only thing that ever truly works at 1 in the morning, I sang to her. Quietly, badly, the little song her mother used to sing to her. The one I taught myself after her mom was gone because Daisy needed to keep hearing it. I sat on the side of a highway in a thunderstorm and sang my dead wife's lullaby to our frightened daughter, the way I do whenever she needs it. And slowly, slowly, I heard her breathing settle, and the crying stop, and her little voice get drowsy, until finally she said, "Okay, Daddy, pancakes." And she let the sitter take her back to bed. I need to tell you about that lullaby because it's the heart of everything that happened in that car, even though I didn't know anyone was listening. It was my wife's song. She used to sing it to Daisy every single night. From the time Daisy was a baby, this little melody that was just theirs, mother and daughter. And when she got sick near the end, one of the things that broke me most was watching her try to sing it with no breath left to sing. After she was gone, Daisy couldn't sleep without it, and I realized that I had to learn it, that this song could not die with her mother, that it had to keep living in our house in whatever cracked, off-key version of it I could manage. So I taught it to myself, late at night, listening to an old video on my phone of my wife singing it, learning my dead wife's lullaby note by note so I could keep giving it to our daughter. I cannot sing. I want to be clear about that. I am terrible. But I have sung that song hundreds of times now, in the dark, badly, because it is the sound of her mother's love, and I am the only one left who can carry it to her. And that is what Vivian Ashford overheard from my back seat. Not just a man comforting a child, but a widower singing his late wife's lullaby to the daughter she left behind. No wonder she cried. I'd have cried too if I hadn't been the one singing. And I sat there for a second in the dark, the way you do, just breathing, gathering myself, the rain coming down on the roof. And then I pulled back out onto the highway and kept driving, with no idea that anything at all had happened. I thought I'd handled a private moment quietly while my passenger slept. I didn't know I'd just been watched. I didn't know the watch was a test. I didn't know any of it. But here's the thing that I think mattered most. And I didn't even think about it at the time because it wasn't a decision, it was just normal. That watch, the expensive one, was still sitting there on the seat, and at some point, when she seemed to be sleeping, it had slid off the seat onto the floor of the car as we took a curve. And I noticed it down there in my mirror at a red light near the state line, and all I thought was, she's going to lose that or step on it. So I said gently, not wanting to wake her if she was out, "Ma'am, your watch slipped onto the floor. It's right by your left foot. Didn't want you to lose it." And when she didn't stir, I just made a mental note to point it out when she woke, and I kept it in view so it wouldn't slide under the seat and get lost. That's all. It genuinely never once crossed my mind that the watch was anything but a thing my passenger might misplace. The idea of it being mine to take was so far outside how I think that it simply wasn't a thought I had. I've thought about that a lot since, about why it never even occurred to me, because Vivienne was so amazed by it, and to me it was nothing. And I think the answer is just my daughter. When you are raising a child, and you understand that they are learning how to be a person almost entirely by watching you, you lose the ability to do things you'd be ashamed for them to see, because they're always somehow with you, even when they're asleep miles away. I could not have taken that watch, not because I'm a saint, but because I am Daisy's father, and the man who steals a sleeping woman's watch is not a man I could come home and make pancakes for her as. The math of it is simple. Nothing in that car was worth being a smaller man in front of my kid. Not a watch, not 10 watches. People think integrity is about big dramatic choices. It mostly isn't. It's mostly about 100 small moments when no one's looking, and whether there's somebody you love whose face appears in your mind and makes the wrong thing unthinkable. For me, that face is 6 years old and likes pancakes. She keeps me honest without even knowing she's doing it. We drove on through the night. The storm eased, and the drive, because of the weather and the roads, took considerably longer than a normal run would have. We lost a lot of time to flooding and detours and crawling through the worst of it. Hours longer, honestly. And we finally arrived at our destination just as the sky was getting gray at the edges, near dawn. And when I put the car in park and turned around to tell her we'd arrived, Vivienne Ashford was sitting there wide awake, and her face was streaked with tears. She had been crying. This composed, cold billionaire woman had clearly been crying for a long time, silently, in the back of my car. And I was alarmed. I thought something was wrong. I thought she'd gotten bad news on one of her calls. I said, "Ma'am, are you all right? Is everything okay?" And she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "How long have you been driving nights so you can be with your daughter in the day?" And I was stunned, because I hadn't told her any of that. And I realized she must have heard my phone call, and I said, a little embarrassed, "Oh, you heard that? I'm sorry, ma'am. I try to keep my personal life out of the car, since my wife passed, about 2 years now. Nights are the only way I can be the one who's there for Daisy in the daytime. It works out." And at the word "passed" and the word "Daisy," I watched this woman's face just crumple, and she put her hand over her mouth, and the tears came again. And then Vivienne Ashford told me the truth about the night, all of it. She told me about the test, about the watch, left out on purpose, about how she'd been lying there the whole time, pretending to sleep, fully expecting me, like everyone before me, to reach for it, to go through her things, to take the long way and pad the fare on the helpless, sleeping rich lady. She confessed it to me plainly, almost unable to look at me. "I left it out to catch you," she said. "I had decided, before you ever pulled away from the curb, that you were probably a thief. That's what I do. That's who I've become. I test people because I'm certain they'll fail, and they almost always do. And instead," she said, her voice breaking, "I lay there and I watched you pull over. You pulled over, off the highway, to a safe spot, before you'd even take a phone call. And then I listened to you talk to your little girl. I heard the whole thing. I heard you ask her about her nightmare. I heard you tell her you loved her to the moon and back and around again. I heard you sing to her." She was really crying now. I heard a man who has nothing, who is exhausted, who drives strangers around in the middle of the night, sing a lullaby to his frightened child on the side of a highway. And then I watched you notice my watch on the floor, and your only thought was that I might lose it. And I have never in my life felt so ashamed of myself as I did lying there, having decided you were a criminal, while you turned out to be the finest father I have ever witnessed." I didn't know what to say. I just said she needed me. That's all. Anybody would. "No," she said sharply. "No, they would not. That's exactly the thing. You think it's nothing, it's everything, it's the only thing." And then she told me the rest, the part that explained the tears. Vivian Ashford had a son. One son, now grown, in his 30s, and she had not spoken to him in many years. She told me how she'd built her empire, how she'd spent his entire childhood building it, working, traveling, closing deals, certain she was doing it all for him, certain there'd be time later. And there never was a later. She'd missed it all. The nightmares, the bedtimes, the lullabies, the school pickups, the 10,000 ordinary moments I was killing myself to be present for. She had handed every one of them to nannies and boarding schools while she built a fortune, and somewhere in there she had lost her son completely. And now he was a grown man who wanted nothing to do with her, and all her billions could not buy back a single one of those bedtimes. She told me about the specific moment she'd realized it was gone, years earlier, and how she'd buried that realization under more work, more deals, more acquiring, because the alternative, sitting with what she'd done, was unbearable. She said the cruelest part was that she had genuinely believed the entire time that she was doing it for him. Every late night at the office, every missed recital, every birthday she attended by phone from another continent. She'd told herself it was all so that he would have everything, never understanding that the everything he actually wanted was just her, in the room, at bedtime. She said children don't want the empire you're building for them. They want you now, tired and present in theirs. And by the time she understood that, he was grown and gone and polite to her in the cold way you're polite to a stranger, and she had a fortune the size of a small country and an empty calendar on the nights that mattered, and not one single person on earth who would have pulled a car over in a thunderstorm to sing to her. She had bought everything and kept nothing. That was the woman crying in my back seat. Not because she was poor, because she had finally, a lifetime too late, understood what rich actually meant, and heard it, by accident, coming through the dark from the driver's seat of a stranger's car. "I sat in your car tonight," she said, "and I listened. To you, give your daughter the one thing I never gave my son, and you don't even know you're rich. You think you're the poor one, and I'm the wealthy one. Cal, I would give every dollar I have, all of it, tonight, gladly, to have been the parent to my son that you just were to your daughter on the side of a road in a thunderstorm. You have the only thing that was ever actually worth having. And I tested you like a thief." And we sat there, the two of us, as the sun came up, this billionaire and this night driver, and I understood that I had it backwards my whole life. I'd spent 2 years feeling like a failure, too poor, too tired, driving a beat-up schedule, unable to give my Daisy the things other kids had. And here was a woman with everything telling me, sobbing, that I was the richest man she'd ever ridden with, because I had my daughter's bedtimes, and no fortune on earth can buy those back once they're gone. I drove home that morning as the sun came up, after I'd dropped her, and I cried a little myself on the empty highway, not out of sadness, but out of something I don't have a clean word for. For 2 years I had carried this quiet shame, this sense that I was failing Daisy, that a better father would have given her a bigger house and newer clothes and a dad who wasn't gray-faced with exhaustion, that my poverty was a kind of failure I was inflicting on my little girl. And in one night, a woman with everything had reached into me and turned that shame completely inside out. She had shown me that the very thing I thought made me a failure, the relentless, exhausting, unglamorous showing up, was in fact the only wealth that had ever mattered, and that I had been quietly rich the whole time and too tired to see it. I thought I'd been scraping by. It turned out I'd been giving my daughter the one inheritance that can't be lost or spent or taken, a father who was there. I have never felt poor again, not for one single day since, no matter what's in my bank account. She cured me of that billionaire, in the back of my own car. Now let me tell you what she did, because this is where it goes from a beautiful night to a changed life. I expected, honestly, that she might tip me well and disappear back into her enormous world. People have big feelings at dawn and forget them by lunch. But Vivian Ashford was not done with me, and what she did was so much wiser than money. First, she tried to refuse to let me undercharge her, because here's a detail I skipped. When we'd arrived, before any of the crying, I'd quoted her the normal rate for the trip, not the much higher amount the extra storm hours would have justified. She'd noticed. She asked why, and I'd told her the truth, that the weather wasn't her fault, that I wasn't going to charge a customer extra for a thunderstorm neither of us ordered. And she told me later that this too, this small refusal to gouge her when she was a captive customer at her mercy, had undone her. But that's the kind of thing that's just normal to me. What she did was this. She did not just write me a check, though she was generous, more generous than I'll say here. What she did was give me back the thing I was actually sacrificing, my days and my nights and my time with my daughter. She had companies, she had needs, and within a few weeks she had arranged for me a real job, a stable, well-paid daytime position as a driver and logistics coordinator within one of her organizations, with regular daytime hours and benefits and security, the kind of job that meant I could stop killing myself on overnight shifts and actually sleep at night under the same roof as my sleeping daughter. She gave me my nights back. Do you understand what that's worth to a single father? She gave me back the ability to be home in the dark when my Daisy has a nightmare, instead of singing to her from the side of a highway. And I'll tell you, the first night I was home. Actually, home, in the house, when she woke up scared, and I came down the hall and sat on the edge of her bed instead of pulling over on some interstate and sang her the song in person, with my hand on her back, and watched her fall back asleep right there in front of me instead of through a phone speaker. I sat in her doorway afterward and wept like a child. 2 years I'd been doing it from the road. 2 years of comforting my daughter through a phone while strangers slept in my back seat. And now I was just there, a father down the hall, the way it's supposed to be. People think the big gift Vivian gave me was a better job. It wasn't. The big gift was that doorway, and my daughter sleeping soundly because her dad was 20 feet away instead of 100 miles. There is no price tag on that. A billionaire is the one who taught me there isn't. She didn't make me rich. She gave me my daughter's night times on top of her days. She gave me all of it. And I want to sit on why that was the perfect thing, the only right thing, because I think it's the whole lesson of how to actually help somebody. A check would have been the obvious move for a billionaire, and it would have helped for a while, and it would have missed the point entirely. Because my problem was never really money. My problem was a cruel arithmetic, that to provide for my daughter I had to be absent from her at the exact hours she was most likely to need me, that the work that fed her also stole me from her at midnight. Money doesn't fix that. More money just means more of the same trade. What Vivian did was look past the money to the actual shape of my problem, and then use her power to dissolve the trade itself, to arrange a life where providing for Daisy and being present for Daisy were no longer enemies. She didn't hand me a fortune and walk away feeling generous. She rebuilt the math of my life so that I got to keep my daughter and my dignity and a paycheck all at once. That is a far rarer and finer thing than charity. Charity gives a man a fish. What she did was notice that the man was being forced to fish at the exact hours his child cried out in the night, and fix that. I will be grateful for it until the day I die. But that's not even the part that matters most. Because that night did something to Vivian, too. She told me, a while later, that she had gone home from that drive and cried for the rest of the night and into the next day. That's the cried all night of it. A billionaire weeping over a stranger's lullaby. And then she had done something she had been too proud and too scared to do for years. She called her son. She told him she was sorry. She told him she'd been wrong, that she'd spent his whole childhood building something for him and had instead lost him, and that she finally understood what she'd thrown away, and that she didn't expect forgiveness, but she had to tell him. And it was the beginning, a hard, slow, imperfect beginning, of them finding their way back to each other. Last I heard, they have dinner now. Regularly, a mother and her grown son, learning to know each other again, so many years too late and yet not too late at all, because it turns out it's never quite too late, even when you think it is. She called me after that first dinner with him, and I'd never heard her sound like that, this woman who'd been all cold edges the night I met her. She was crying again, but a completely different kind of crying. She told me they'd been awkward and stiff for the first hour, two strangers who happened to share a history, and then somewhere in the second hour he'd laughed at something. Really laughed, the way he had as a little boy, and she said it was like a door she thought was bricked over had simply opened. She said she'd told him about the night in my car, about the driver who sang to his daughter on the side of the highway, and how it had finally shown her what she'd missed. And she said her son had gone quiet, and then said, "I would have liked it if you'd sung to me." And it had broken her heart and started to mend it in the same breath. They had a long way to go, she told me. Years of distance don't vanish over one dinner. But they had started. The bricked-over door was open, and it had taken a thunderstorm and a stranger's lullaby to open it. And she told me, plainly, that none of it would have happened without that drive. That she'd needed to sit in the dark and overhear what fatherhood actually sounds like. A tired man singing to a scared kid for no audience, no reward, no one watching. To finally see the shape of what she'd lost, and to find the courage to try to get even a piece of it back. So, I gave a billionaire her son back, and she gave me my daughter's nights. And neither of us knew, when I pulled away from that hotel in the rain, that we were about to hand each other the things we each needed most. I think about that night all the time. About the test she ran on me, expecting me to fail, and how the test had nothing to do with the watch at all, in the end. The real test was never, will he steal from me? The real test, the one she didn't even know she was administering, was, what is this man like when he thinks no one important is watching? When he thinks it's just him and the dark and a sleeping stranger. And it turns out that's the only test that has ever measured anything true about a person. Not how you behave for the people you're trying to impress, but how you behave when you're certain no one who matters can see you. Because that, when no one's watching, is simply who you are. I wasn't being good for Vivian Ashford that night. I didn't know she was awake. I pulled over and sang to my daughter because that's just what I do, in the dark, for no one, because she's mine and she was scared. And that, it turned out, was worth more to a billionaire than the watch, more than the fare, more than anything she could have caught me stealing. The most valuable thing in that car all night was never that watch. It was a father loving his child when he thought nobody could see. And here's what I most want you to take from this. You are always being watched, in a sense, not by billionaires in the backseat, but by something. By your own kids, who see far more than you think. By your own character, which is built entirely out of what you do when you believe it doesn't count. We spend so much energy performing goodness for the people we want to impress, and almost none on who we are at 1 in the morning when we're sure it doesn't matter. But that 1 in the morning version of you, the one no one sees, that's the real one. That's the only one. Build that one. Be the same man in the empty car that you'd be on the bright stage. There's a freedom in it, too, that I don't think people expect. When you decide to simply be the same person in the dark as in the daylight, you get to stop performing. You stop managing what people think of you, stop keeping track of which version of yourself you showed to whom. There's only one of you, and he's the same whether the back seat is empty or holds a sleeping billionaire, and that turns out to be a tremendously restful way to live. I wasn't trying to pass Vivian's test because I didn't know there was one. I was just being the only man I know how to be, the one I have to face in the mirror and at the breakfast table across from a 6-year-old who thinks I hung the moon. Turns out that man passes every test because he isn't taking any. He's just living the same way in every room. And the night a stranger was secretly watching, there was nothing to catch because there was nothing being hidden. That's the whole secret, if there is one. Don't have a public self and a private self. Just have a self. Make him good, and then you never have to remember which one you're supposed to be. Tell me in the comments about a moment you did the right thing when you were absolutely sure no one was watching, or a time you found out, like Vivian did, that someone you'd misjudged was far better than you'd assumed. I read every single one of them, out here in the dark between fares, and those stories are honestly the best part of my night. And listen, I won't push you. A man who learned what I learned doesn't perform for an audience.